finally Friday. It's Friday, Friday.
Thank God it's
All right, welcome back to the Friday Show, presented this week by Smiling Tiger, who is standing at Harris Farms in California. Find out more about him coming up. But first, Ray, the Breeders' Cup is, yes, 2 weeks away. It's sneaking up on us. Next week, early next week, is the deadline for pre-entries. They'll be announced on Wednesday, and then it'll just be a blur from there until the November 1st and 2nd World Championships. What are you most looking forward to this year?
Well, I think we're going to see Horse of the Year decided. I'm not sure which race it's going to come out of, but there's a few different candidates. I think I'm looking forward to two things. One, I want to see if Code of Honor is really as good a horse as I think he is. And if he wins the Classic, he's going to he'll be the 3-year-old champion, male. And, depending on the other outcomes, he could end up as Horse of the Year. The other thing I'm looking forward to, and I do every year really because of the Kentucky Derby the following spring, is the Juvenile. Not just the winner of the Juvenile, but looking to see if there's somebody else in that field who maybe wasn't good enough to win on this day, but who, projecting forward a few months, might be good enough to win on the first Saturday in May.
The format this year is the same as it was last year, meaning on Friday it's Future Stars Friday, so you have all the juvenile races, including the Juvenile Turf Sprint and the Juvenile Turf Fillies, and etc. And then the rest of the races are on Saturday. I love the turf races at the Breeders' Cup. I especially love the ones that have the European horses in them because I don't get a chance to see them very often during the year. And then some of them I've never even heard of that come over and perform. I just love that competition between the U.S. and other countries at the Breeders' Cup, and trying to handicap those horses, and looking at, for example, Sir Michael Stout when he comes over. I mean, he's so good with his horses, and a lot of times they're not overbet for sure. I mean, I remember one a couple of years ago. It was 8-1 at Santa Anita. So that kind of stuff, it is just such a handicapping bonanza, and I usually save a lot of my bankroll for the Breeders' Cup.
Yeah, the Santa Anita's main track has changed this year, and that's one of the things that I'm going to be interested in watching is whether or not the track has been will be speed favoring as it has been in the past. It's definitely a slower racetrack than it has been in the past. If you just look at the opening weekend times for 3 of the Grade 1 races, American Pharoah Stakes won by 8 rings. It's the slowest final time since they inaugurated that race back in 1970. The filly companion to that, the Chandelier, which used to be known as the Oak Leaf, I believe, that also had the slowest time since the race was created in 1970. So those 2 races were particularly slow. The Awesome McGinn Stakes, that was won front-running style by Mongolian Groom, was not quite so slow. It was actually faster than Accelerate and Move to Hodge the last 2 years. But I think this track, in reaction to safety concerns in the spring, was dug much deeper, and it's going to be much slower.
I think that's a given based on the results so far. But of course, safety is paramount, and that's been the issue all along leading up to the Breeders' Cup at Santa Anita. So if there are no issues safety-wise, it will be a successful Breeders' Cup no matter what the times are. However, in the past, it has been difficult, or you could say in some way easy, to handicap the Breeders' Cup races at Santa Anita on the main track, just because usually there's a discernible bias of some kind, usually a speed-favoring bias. We've had several instances where it's just clear on Friday, it's a speed, and then on Saturday, speed, and sometimes, like right in the middle of the card on Saturday, it'll change, and then you're like, what happened? So that's something to really pay attention to with this track. You talked about the times, but if you look at the placement of the horses who won, there weren't any closers coming in late to pick up to win those races. They were prominent horses, so that's something to watch if we're going to have that bias again on this racetrack.
Yeah, there's another consideration for handicapping purposes is home field advantage. Will the California trainers have the edge? I always think that they do, but it wasn't that long ago that New York trainers came in and did really well. And this year, I think with stronger racing programs at Churchill Downs and Keeneland because of the added purse money they have, and Oaklawn Park for that matter, I think the Midwest horsemen are coming in probably with a stronger group of horses than we've seen in recent years. So that's another thing I think is going to be interesting to watch is, will the West Coast dominate? Will New York trainers do well? Will the Midwestern trainers come on stronger?
Or will the Europeans dominate? Like I said, that's why I like handicapping the turf races. Usually there isn't so much of a bias. But just remember, this year, a couple of changes. One is no more downhill. So it's not a 6.5 sprint on the turf. It's 5 furlongs, which is a huge difference. And you used to be able to handicap that downhill sprint because it was a very specific horse for course type thing. Right. Like Misdirection winning it how many ever times? 3 times. She was a horse for that course. So we don't have that angle anymore. And then, of course, since they're not using the downhill, the races will start a little bit differently on the turf for the longer ones. So it's just something to keep in mind when you're handicapping.
The other thing that's different this year, and again, it's because of what happened early in 2019 with the fatalities, is California now has the most restrictive medication policies in terms of Lasix, which the Lasix dose is 5 cc's, which is half the permitted level in other states. The use of anti-inflammatories is more restrictive. It's no longer 24-hour to give butazolidine. It's 48 hours or more. Corticosteroid injections are now 14 days. And so a lot of trainers are going to have to maybe for sure get used to different drug protocols. And whether or not that affects performance, who really knows? But it is something that California trainers and a few East Coast trainers who shipped out there for specific races have kind of gotten used to. So that's another angle to this year's Breeders' Cup. And I personally, I'm happy that we will be seeing the most restrictive medication protocols that the Breeders' Cup has ever had.
And that adds another layer to, maybe some of this is handicapping, figuring out who is going to have the most success at this Breeders' Cup based on those rules you just talked about, based on the new track surface, all of that. So we have a poll question. Which group of trainers do you think will be most successful at this year's Breeders' Cup at Santa Anita? Will it be the Midwest, as Ray suggested might happen? Will it be the home base in California or the East Coasters? Or will it be the Europeans? Let us know your thoughts at PaulickReport.com. Ray, speaking of California, Smiling Tiger is standing at Harris Farms. There's a deal on the table I want to tell you about, but first, tell me about how he's been doing this year.
Well, we've already mentioned that he's had 2 Breeders' Cup Challenge Series winners, Spice Perfection winning at Keeneland to get into the Filly and Mare Sprint, and El Tigre Terrible winning at Santa Anita, getting into the Juvenile Turf Sprint. But this summer when I was out in Del Mar, I saw another Smiling Tiger that really impressed me. It was a horse named Quit Kvetching, which I think I've said to you a few times. Stop complaining.
Yeah.
So anyways, yet another impressive Smiling Tiger winner.
And if you book your mare by November 3rd, which is the day after the Breeders' Cup, it's a $6,000 fee, and it's going to go up to $7,500 after that. Now, keep in mind that at that Breeders' Cup, it's possible Smiling Tiger could have a couple of winners. So keep that deal in mind. That is going to do it for this edition of the Friday Show. Check out more information about Smiling Tiger at smilingtigerstallion.com. Thanks for joining us, and we'll talk to you next time.